Okay, I am thrilled to bring together a little bit of a back and forth, a tiff, if you will, that started on Al Gore's internet, on the app formerly known as Twitter, after our recent episode that had an all-star panel of folks, including Aaron Reguberg, talking about AI data centers. We talked during that time about an article in the New York Times titled "Democrats Don't Have to Campaign on Climate Change Anymore" by Matthew Huber. It's such a pleasure to be able to bring disparate voices together to talk through where we agree, disagree, or misunderstand each other on today's episode of the podcast. So I'm happy to welcome for the first time Matt Huber, who is a professor at Syracuse University in the Department of Geography and the Environment, and also the author of Climate Change as Class War, Building Socialism on a Warming Planet. Matt Huber, welcome to Bad Faith Pod.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and returning as one of the most frequent Bad Faith guests I've recently learned, Aaron Regunberg. He is a former state rep. He is a contributing editor to The New Republic and co-host of Fighting Fascism podcast. Welcome back.
Just can't keep me away.
Apparently, I can't quit you. Okay, Matt, I'm going to start with you since this is your first bite of the apple of correcting the record or pushing back against us or what was said on the last podcast. So I cede the floor to you. What did you make of that episode, our conversation, and why did you end up having a bit of a back and forth with Aaron on the internet?
Well, it's a long story. I mean, the first thing that I just couldn't let stand was I was compared to Hillary Clinton's discourse about, if you break up the banks, you're gonna. And I am a original Bernie bro from 2016, so that cut deep.
I can imagine. Okay.
But more generally, the New York Times article is trying to be honest. I was really inspired by Zohran Mamdani's campaign in the sense that I felt like the number one problem for the left right now is we're kind of hemorrhaging working class support, and we need to kind of figure out a way to win back the working class from the right, as Aaron's podcast talks a lot about. And Mamdani, everyone, when they talked about his campaign, really talked about how one of the reasons it was so successful was because it was laser focused on the cost of living and on material issues facing working people every day. And that has linked up to a wider discussion in the Democratic Party about how to campaign and how to, again, stem this departure of working class voters from the party. And so the article was really trying to make the case that, climate change is a hugely important issue. I wouldn't think that, I wouldn't write a book about it if I didn't think that, but that it is not, I think, necessary to sort of include in that laser focus of material issues facing working people. And that, to be quite honest, most people I think that care a lot about climate change are already kind of firmly in the Democratic Party camp. And that if we want to win working class voters, it's not necessary really to center the climate crisis, to talk about climate change. We can center jobs, we can center public investment, we can center the cost of living. And if we can build the power to actually enact that kind of broad agenda, obviously we can start to enact policies that can address climate change. But it's not, I don't think it's really necessary to make it central. And I actually, in the piece, I tried to argue that really for the Democratic Party, at least, for the last, I would say, since at least Barack Obama, there has been a kind of narrative that climate change would be that issue that could really pull together a broader coalition around green jobs, around a Green New Deal, and that this would be this sort of thing that kind of catalyze a big kind of shift, or even like a realignment of politics toward the Democrats. And a lot of debate we've had is whether or not the Democrats ever talk about climate change, and obviously Kamala Harris didn't really campaign particularly on climate change. But I would argue that the Biden administration did make climate change a pretty central part of its administration and a lot of its policy. And basically, all those policies, it's very clear. I know, as Aaron has pointed out, like most ordinary people didn't even know about his climate policies, particularly the Inflation Reduction Act. And research has shown that where these investments, Bidenomics investments, took place, people didn't really associate them with Biden or any kind of political project or anything like that. And basically, as we saw in 2024, the kind of shift of working class voters towards Trump just kept going unabated. And so, again, I think that's the Democratic Party, and I'm not a Democratic Party even person, but they are historically unpopular and remain so. And I think if they care about regaining power, they're going to have to really, I think, learn a lot from people like Mamdani, who's, we can't, the left cares about a lot of issues, but we need to actually focus and have a kind of minimal agenda that tries to address working people's needs. And that's kind of where I was coming from.
I'm going to turn it over to you, Aaron, but just really briefly, if the conversation were about not centering climate change as, the primary issue, I don't know that there would be a ton of disagreement. Certainly some folks believe because it's such an existential issue, it should be centered. But generally speaking, I don't know that that's the argument. I think most of the frustration, and again, I know that authors frequently don't write their own headlines, but is because the headline is Democrats don't have to campaign on climate change anymore. Not that Democrats don't need to make climate change their tentpole issue anymore. So I want to give you an opportunity to speak to the title and whether or not you think that that contributed to some of how your article was interpreted and framed.
Absolutely. And the first title, if you missed it, was called Forget Climate Change. Democrats need to talk about other issues. So that was interpreted.
I didn't miss that.
Worst to bad, or
I think the first one was worse, I would say.
Yeah.
But again, Mamdani didn't campaign on climate change, and he is a self-described eco-socialist activist who made his way in the Democratic Socialists of America as a public power activist, very strongly connected with the Eco-Socialist Working Group. And there's been reporting showing that, again, what his campaign was this laser focus. And I know he probably mentioned it a few times, but it certainly wasn't core to his campaign. And to me, he did build this kind of pretty incredible multiracial working class coalition behind his campaign and defeated this horrific, stalwart of the Democratic Party power structure, Andrew Cuomo. So I find that inspiring, and I think we maybe should, I think a lot of conversation after the article, context matters. Like, there are parts of the country where it probably does make sense to campaign on climate change, but just in a general sense, I think if we want to win working class voters who are dealing with, I always draw from, the Yellow Vest revolt in France that happened against climate policy. They claim that politicians care about the end of the world, but we're trying to get to the end of the month. And I think climate politics we all know it's a very existential crisis, but I think a lot of voters don't see it as an end of month, something that's really pressing and urgent to their day-to-day survival. And I hope that changes, but I think for now, we just have to, again, dig out of this hole of what scholars call class de-alignment, where working class people are shifting to the right because the left is really not providing them a kind of a place in politics. So.
Okay. Aaron, the floor is yours. What do you have to say?
So there's a lot there. I think I want to start by just trying to maybe lay out some points of agreement or common ground. There's a sort of a weak form of this argument and a strong form. And I think the weak form is totally reasonable. Not just reasonable, is something that, climate organizers have been doing for a long time, which is to say that the most effective ways to talk about climate, which is admittedly this big sort of abstract issue, is to talk about, the specific material ways that it is impacting people's lived daily lives and the material benefits that climate action can have. and in that way, I think it's similar to other sort of big, abstract issues, like, for example, political corruption. There was a video, that John Ossoff put out a month or two ago. That whatever we think about Ossoff, I think everyone kind of agreed it was an incredibly rhetorically effective, powerful video that was talking about political corruption, and it was doing it through the story of big pharma raising prescription drug prices and using money and corruption in politics in order to hurt people. And that was very effective. I think similarly, it's going to be more effective, again, depending where you are. If you're talking to someone in some areas, to talk about climate through the lens of the property insurance or the home insurance crisis, and talk about how property insurance rates keep going up and up, or property values are going down because of these climate disasters we're seeing. If you're talking to someone else, in say Arizona, it might be like, wow, summer has been ruined, right? Like, you can't go outside for vast swaths of the year because of the extreme heat that we're seeing. So, I think there's agreement on that. I think the stronger form that I think we did see in that New York Times piece of Democrats should not talk about climate. I think is very wrong morally and strategically on a couple levels. First of all, this isn't the main thing, but I do think it's just kind of like leaving narrative potency on the table. Like, again, that Ossoff video, right? He could have just had a story of prescription drug prices are going up. Doesn't that suck? I think it's a more powerful story to put it in the context of these corporate special interests that have been rigging the system and harming you through that corruption. And so similarly, I think, like, you could just say, oh, it sucks how hot it is, or it sucks that property insurance rates keep going up. Or you can tell this larger story about how corporate special interests, the fossil fuel industry, has known for decades that their products were going to cause exactly these harms, and then turned around and defrauded the public in order to block the very kinds of solutions that could have alleviated these harms we are now feeling. And made trillions of dollars in profit from that, and now we're leaving all of us to pay the price. Like, I think that is a story, like the prescription drug ones, that actually has a villain, right? And I think if we're gonna what do you mean? Can I? Okay, go ahead. There's a lot of points that I'd love to just quick. I'll try to quickly. I know, but I don't want you to say all your points at once, because I want Matt to have a chance to respond to them. So if you noted them down, I want to do one and then get into it and then come back to another one. If that makes sense, Aaron. Sure. Can I quickly make a comment on the Zoran point?
Yeah,
and then move on? Because I think like rhetorically, that's maybe, Matt, your strongest point. I think substantively, to me, it is not a very persuasive argument. I mean, Zoran Mamdani, as you said, he made a choice to talk about precisely one theme through the lens of, like, 3 or 4 policy proposals, and then he exhibited this superhuman, absurd message discipline, and only ever returning to and talking about that one theme and these 3 or 4 proposals. So he didn't talk much about a lot of issues, right? Like, he didn't talk much about healthcare. I don't think that's strong evidence that, like, the reason Democrats have been losing working class voters is they talk too much about healthcare. We all, as single payer advocates, Medicare for All, probably agree they're talking shittily about healthcare, but that's a different story. I will also say, I don't think that Zoran would have lost had he talked more about climate. And had that happened, I think he would have come into office with more of a mandate to pursue bigger climate victories. And I think that should be relevant for those of us who, like, want to, maintain organized human civilization on this planet. Ultimately, and then I'll shut up, Brianna. But I think that is ultimately what this is about. Like, in order to address this, in order to keep away the worst case scenarios, we all agree we need decarbonization as rapidly as possible. And that is not easy, right? There are technical challenges. There are also political obstacles. This immensely powerful incumbent fossil fuel industry that has spent decades politicizing climate and blocking climate action, that's going to continue. And if we are not working to build a mandate and build, like, real social and political demands for climate, we're not going to do this. We're going to be fucked. And I don't think it's reasonable to say that you can do that without talking about climate. So that to me, that's like ultimately, we're going to talk about polling and all this other stuff. That to me is ultimately like why I think this debate matters.
Yeah, so I did want to come back to the Mamdani point later anyway, but I don't want to lose track of what you brought up earlier, Aaron, which is this central concern that I had with your article, Matt, which is it is framed as though it's a zero-sum game. This might not be intentional, but it is framed as though it's a zero-sum game, and that talking about climate more, or that talking about, well, there's a couple of things. That talking about climate more comes at the expense of talking about material issues, and also that they're two separate things. So to Aaron's point, there are myriad ways that climate concerns show up as a budget item in Americans' lives, and you acknowledge those ways to some extent in the article, but still go on to talk about any emphasis on that as though it is somehow something separate and apart from a material issue. Do you sort of take that criticism, especially in light of the extent to which Mamdani, to be clear, was running for mayor of New York? It's a local race, very different concerns than a national politician.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of Mamdani's like core policy that demands that he went back to over and over again, to me, is a straightforwardly climate demand, which is to expansion of public transit, fast, free buses, right?
Sure,
And
sure.
decommodifying public transit, which would get people to drive less and probably lead to less emissions. But I think, again, it's important to point out why this eco-socialist climate activist did not link the climate to it. He made it about free buses for working people, right? And I don't think it's a zero-sum game, but politics is hard. It's not easy to win over masses of people. And again, as Aaron said, that there is this message discipline he had. He could have talked about climate with that policy. He did not. And we can debate whether or not that was a wise choice, but I think it's interesting to reflect on how successful he was and why he didn't link that issue to climate. To me, I share all the moral outrage about what's happening to our planet. I often say I have a daughter who's going to reach retirement age in 2080, and I fear for what the planet's going to look like. And I do see there is a kind of moral, most of the response to my article is this kind of moral argument that we have to talk about this because it's so important. But to me, and this in my book, this is my basic argument that really to address this crisis, we need power. We need way more power than we have. And so we have to be really strategic about how to build that power. And for me, that power, I'm a Marxist socialist who believes power is rooted in the working class and organizing working class power. And actually, I was a big proponent of like a Green New Deal and thought it was a very exciting type of framework. But it's worth pointing out that the original New Deal would not have been possible without the organization of huge working class power, strike waves and massive working class organization. And also I would say that FDR's kind of program sort of tried to, like Mamdani, tried to create this kind of mass working class coalition that was incredibly popular, that led to really generations of political power for that kind of form of governance in the 1930s. Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here, Donald Trump is president. He has ripped up the minimal climate progress we made in the Biden administration. And I'm looking at an opposition party that is historically unpopular. And I'm thinking about how can we build the kind of majoritarian mass power to not only address climate, but all the other crises we're facing around healthcare and all these kinds of things. And so I do think if I can add one more thing, I think it's unfortunate, but I try to write more about this on Substack, but I actually think the Green New Deal cycle of politics actually kind of poisoned climate as an issue because of just the way it was rolled out. And I've been ranting about this for a while, but AOC's office released this, I consider it a somewhat insane FAQ document associated with the Green New Deal policy rollout that was immediately capitalized on by Fox News and the right-wing kind of scare machine to make climate politics and to make a Green New Deal about taking away hamburgers and making it so you can't fly to see your grandparents. And that, like everything else in our politics, climate became this highly polarized political issue. And it's that experience that has led me to think it's really not going to be an issue that can be the basis for building back that scale of majoritarian mass working class power.
I think what I have trouble with in this argument is I have never seen anyone who's making it provide any real evidence for the claim that this is what has led Democrats to lose working class support, that this is what led Trump to win. I mean, you told a story of IRA passed and then Trump came in. Like, there's a lot, as you said, Democratic Party is historically unpopular. There's a lot of things going on there, right? For example,
but not AOC and Bernie, for instance. Like that's also part of this issue. Sorry to interrupt, Aaron, but the failures of the Democratic Party are coming from the exact part of the party that had no interest in the Green New Deal, did not run in 2024 on the Green New Deal, already didn't talk about climate, and what felt sort of perverse was using their failures as an excuse to further retrench from an issue that had no bearing, to Aaron's point, on any of the Democratic Party's losses or failures to win. Go ahead, Aaron. I'm sorry.
Well, and just the fact that we are talking, like, that there is this discourse around this, it's hard for me to understand that in the context of like this bumbling, senescent president who could not sell his agenda or achievements, including the IRA, as you said, no one had heard of it. In the context of Gaza, in the context of, Kamala Harris jettisoning any populist economic stuff at the behest of her like corporate, brother-in-law. The Democratic Party has been bleeding working class support for a long time because it's been taken over by Wall Street and corporate special interests and big tech billionaires. Like, there's so much going on here. And the fact that we're debating that that the issue here is that they talk too much about climate change, it's hard for me to understand, particularly because of the reality, and you had a phrase, I agree, we don't want to get exactly into a battle of the polls, but like, climate change is popular. It's a majoritarian or super majoritarian issue. You in one of your pieces, you mentioned the Yale program on climate change communication as like the most respected of these surveys. They just this week came out with their latest, big set of surveys, and it found that, for example, 67% of voters think global warming is affecting the cost of living in the United States. 64% think it's affecting their own cost of living, to this question of like material impacts. They found that 65% supported transitioning the U.S. economy to 100% clean energy. Again, I don't want to get caught in all these numbers, but we could go on and on. There's so much to deal with the Democratic Party. The idea that they have talked too much, which I would argue they've talked very marginally, if at all, about climate, but the idea that they've talked too much about a popular issue, it's just, I literally, like, I don't understand the argument.
So, I haven't actually seen the new data, and the one you cited, 64% think it will affect their cost of living, I think is really interesting and definitely contest. I mean, as you know, the one I have looked at for years now is they ask a question, do you think climate change will affect you personally? And that number has always been above 50% say no, right? And they've been asking this question since 2008. Most recently, it's 56% say that it will not affect them personally. That number has been rising for the last few years, and I would argue, again, I think it's sad, but I do think climate has been polarized as an issue, and that is reflected in that data. But to Brianna's
which
point,
is true, it has been polarized. Let's be clear, though, like, that wasn't because of climate advocates, like there are literally
No,
internal
no,
memos by the fossil fuel industry where they're like, okay, our plan, our strategy is to polarize climate change in order to stop climate action. So it's true that that's like a big obstacle. I don't know how we overcome that
Well,
obstacle
again,
without building.
but isn't the answer to overcoming that having Democrats talking about all the ways in which climate change is going to affect you
Right.
personally, not running away and tucking your tail? This is the problem consistently with Democrats, is that they follow polls instead of making what the results, changing the results to fit their reality, the reality, not their reality subjectively. Whereas Republicans, you cited the idea that Republicans made the Green New Deal announcement from AOC all about hamburgers. That's malarkey and foolishness. But instead of running away from that, we're saying, well, they're going to have some spin about our good ideas, so we shouldn't have good ideas anymore. Is there any space for persuasion on the left?
well, again, I think that they were able to run with the hamburger thing because of AOC's office just
Well, wait,
horrible
let's
document.
interrogate that for a second. Were they able to win that rhetorical battle if we assume that they did because they're just so good at messaging and AOC's flyer was so bad, or is it because AOC was basically the only person in Congress who was pushing back? And that's overwhelmingly Democrats didn't support the Green New Deal. Nancy Pelosi very famously punished AOC for that demonstration. The demonstration was antagonistic to AOC, the head of leadership in the House, right? And this was an internal party battle, and AOC had no support.
Yeah, but here I would again like the Sunrise Movement, which sat in on Pelosi's office with AOC famously in 2018.
Yeah, I was there. I remember.
I give them credit. I mean, they built this whole movement around a Green New Deal, but and they were given a seat at the table with the Biden transition team in 2020 when he was, the what
When
did they
he
call it?
won.
Yeah, but he brought in AOC and the Sunrise Movement, and what was it called? The like Unity.
Unity
Yeah, I
Party.
remember.
They brought it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was very critical of it at the time because it was obviously just lip service. And the Sunrise Movement had just given Biden an F grade for his climate policy during the primary, and then turned around and revised it to like a B plus or something so that they could justify working with this man who obviously had zero interest in pursuing the kind of climate reform that could actually keep this planet from going off of the proverbial cliff.
Yeah, but I think they actually had more of an impact than you would give him credit because when he came into office, he said climate was going to be a whole of government issue that they were going to address. They did make it a priority when it came down to they could only get certain things through the budget reconciliation, and Manchin and et cetera was blocking it. They prioritized climate.
That wasn't entirely what happened. I mean, I'm sorry, this was like 4 years ago. Please refer back to Bad Faith episode in the summer of 2022 or 2021 or whatever it was. But I seem to vaguely recall that there was an internal battle in which the earmarked climate spending kept getting decimated, just hacked down. And Bernie had suggested something like 6 billion or trillion, sorry, trillion, billion, must be billion.
Well, his
$6
campaign
billion
called for 16 trillion. 16 trillion in his campaign.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the Biden proposal was like a fraction of that, and then let's say it's 6 or 8, and then that got chopped down to like 1 or 2. And I remember looking at the policies that they were cutting at the time, and for example, there was a plan to decarbonize all of the school buses because there's particular pollution is bad, but also in the face of your kid getting dropped off, that was supposed to be a priority. And they went from saying a very relatively small amount of money could accomplish that, and they cut that down to only decarbonizing like 1 out of every 10 school buses. To the point where, of course, Biden couldn't brag about the accomplishments because that sounds ridiculous. What exactly did he accomplish after spending what Republicans are going to say is a lot of money when you've done nothing but half measures because you didn't have the cojones inside your own party to actually stick the landing and blame Manchin and Sinema for everything, which is also why we don't have a $15 minimum wage and why apparently his presidency, why do we even elect him if he couldn't do anything? Ultimately came the argument, and which is part of why I think the Democrats lost in 2024 because they spent 2 years saying we can't do anything.
I live in a rural district where there was a mandate in New York State to electrify school buses, and so we got an electric school bus in my rural district in a very, very cold and snowy region that I live in upstate or central New York. And it turned out that the electric school bus just did not work well in the winter. And so in my community, everyone hates this electric school bus and everyone's pissed off about it. So one other problem, and was problem with AOC's FAQ document, is that the left doesn't often have a serious technological vision of what actually it would take to decarbonize, and that further polarizes things, right? So yeah, I'll stop there.
Even with that example, though, like, what do you mean to say when you bring that example? Because there are city bus fleets across the country that have obviously electrified, including here in DC, right? Very successfully. So what point are you trying to make by bringing up the fact that in your locality, they happen to have a bus that broke down, as though regular buses don't sometimes break down and not work?
It's just an anecdote.
What is the argument? Right, but what's the purpose of you raising that anecdote in the context of this conversation? Do you not believe that we should electrify
No, I do, buses? But we have to be serious about making sure these technologies work, right? And will function. And if we don't, then people are going to get pissed off. And they're going to be pissed off at climate politics, which is what we're actually seeing, not just in the US, we're seeing it all across Europe. There's a green lash against climate policy because it's seen as pushing through these technological types of visions that aren't actually functioning to improve people's lives in the way we say they're going to. So we have to have a real credible, honest vision for technologies that will actually improve people's lives. That's all. And you're right. It's just an anecdote. It's not a fair thing to say about the larger program of decarbonizing buses. But I thought it was interesting to bring up.
And I think it's an important point that we need to do a good job. The technology needs we need to make sure it works. I would point you. I put it in the chat. The latest Yale data. I think it is not borne out in the United States, at least, about where this trajectory is based on the latest data. People want this stuff. It is popular. For me, I think that it is important to just note the larger context in which this debate is happening. And just to be clear, if I have ever gotten heated on our Twitter exchanges, which I will admit I have, it is a big part of it. This larger context, which is a reality where people are not talking about climate right now, right? Businesses are ditching all of their previous climate pledges. Politico just folded E&E News, which was its standalone climate and energy outlet. NPR just folded its climate desk. Washington Post just laid off its entire climate team. It's already happening that we're not talking about climate. And then into this, you have this this discourse, which has, some lefties like you, Matt, but it's largely corporate aligned groups like Welcome Pack and Breakthrough Institute, the Koch-funded network, the Koch-funded group, who are saying that Democrats can't talk about climate. And again, why I get heated is because that matters. This discourse is having a real concrete effect, right? We just saw in New York, Governor Hochul, she actively fought to water down New York's signature climate bill successfully. That just happened. And it's not just New York. Gavin Newsom did it in California. My piece of shit governor, Dan McKee in Rhode Island, has been pushing to throw out our climate law that was passed a few years ago. So this shit matters. And it is already the case that I guess I'd say the argument that you're making is already being made in every sector that I see in ways that are not helping our climate cause, and we shouldn't be contributing to that.
Yeah, you acknowledge, Matt, in your piece you write, for the past several months, Democratic elites have been debating how much to talk about climate change, if at all. Right? That's where the Democratic Party is. Their question is, are we even going to talk about climate change at all? So it felt curious that you would want to enter into this conversation and basically, with your expertise as a climate guy give them the sort of permission structure to stop. It seems almost naive to think, oh, Democrats are going to take this advice and this flashy headline in the New York Times and say, oh, we got to make sure our climate policy is wrapped in language that appeals to working class and centers their economic concerns, as opposed to this is a justification to ignore this thing that I already want to ignore because my donor base wants me to.
Yeah, I mean, I understand there are bad forces in the world that would be very happy if we just never talked about climate. So I take that point. But again, I was trying to, in that part you read, really, what I wanted to do, and to be clear, the New York Times editing cuts down a lot of stuff you're trying to say. But
Sure.
I led the
Well,
piece with this candidate named Sam Forstag in Montana, who's AOC and Bernie endorsed, who's a smoke jumper. If you know what that is, it means he jumps out of airplanes to fight fires. And of course, he has commented on the fact that fire seasons are getting worse where he lives in Montana. But what you find if you go to his website, there's no mention of climate change. And I actually watched a YouTube forum that was put together by the League of Conservation Voters on environmental issues, and he again talked about fires and he talked about temperatures, but he never, he really didn't center the climate crisis as a thing, and mostly talked about cost of living and public lands and other issues. And by the way, I wrote this in early May, he just won his primary, right? And so, again, I'm taking inspiration from a whole set of not just Mamdani, but other candidates, working class candidates, union leaders who are running progressive campaigns, whereas 6 years ago, they probably would have put the Green New Deal and bright lights in the center. Now they're not. And we can say they're corrupted as well by these donor networks, but I don't think so. I think, there are other forces at work, like the Center for Working Class Politics and Jacobin Magazine, who have been trying to kind of really trumpet these candidates and say we need more union and working class candidates that are coming from working class backgrounds. And the piece really leads with these candidates and tries to ask the question, why is it that they are not talking much about climate? And I think their goal is to rebuild a kind of working class politics, and the real question is whether or not we really need to center
I mean,
climate
again,
rhetorically in that politics.
yeah, I have no issue with what a given candidate chooses to do in their locality, but I'm a little confused about this cherry picking because AOC and Cori Bush, certainly a working class candidate who lived in her car very famously, championed the Green New Deal and won. Obviously, she was pushed out by AIPAC later. That's a whole other conversation. But I have been very wary of the liberal tendency to want to criticize the left for fetishizing the working class as only white working class hard hat wearing people. But I have to raise the flag that there are a lot of different kinds of working class candidates, and they don't seem to be really what we're talking about. Let's just say what we mean. We're talking about how to win in white, rural, purple districts, are we not?
Not necessarily. I mean, Mamdani, I talked about
Well,
Mamdani, who,
we got to
again,
stop being so Mamdani pilled. Guys, I really don't want to say anything negative about Mamdani, but Mamdani won because he was running against Andrew Cuomo in a ranked choice voting district where there was cross endorsements, where he was able to get legitimacy from the political sector, left-leaning political sector in New York that consolidated around him, only because it wasn't like a spoiler argument with him as compared to someone like Brad Lander. And without those cross endorsements and without having a cartoonishly evil person to run against, I don't know if we would be in the situation we are today. And that is no slight against Mamdani. It's just the intractability of our political system. So I really don't want to overread into Zohran Mamdani, who's also a mayoral candidate, not someone who's setting national climate policy.
let me also make clear that I see this phenomenon as a post-2024. You're correct that progressives between 2018 and 24 were putting climate at the center. I have seen since 24, there has been a shift, and they are not doing so. And I think we need to think about why. And it has to do with just the utter, the just lack of political power that the 2024 election revealed. And a lot of people are rethinking about how do we
Do you think
strategically
that's why,
change.
Aaron?
I mean, I don't, like you said, Brianna, and I agree with you, Matt, like I don't have a problem if Sam Forstag running statewide in Montana has decided that because of...
Not statewide, really. I
think there's
there's two districts.
Is there two districts in Montana?
All right. I think so, but I'm
running half state in Montana, decides because it is a, ruby red place, and the fossil fuel industry has so successfully politicized climate change, which is true, and that was their goal for decades, and they put hundreds of millions of dollars into that. That he's not going to talk about climate like that. That's fine. The issue, and I think it's part of a larger issue, right? There have been lots of forces that have been trying to use the 2024 election to say Democrats need to not, stand up for immigrants, need to throw trans folks under the bus, need to not talk about climate, right? Like there's been this effort, and having your voice in it is helpful to that effort. And I think on this, like before versus after 2024, it's one of the reasons I find this so weird is that in a lot of ways, I think on paper, the dynamics right now are like more fertile for generating popular support for climate action than maybe they ever have been, right? Like clean energy is now the cheapest form of electricity. The harmful effects of climate change are becoming like undeniably noticeable for millions of Americans who are seeing the extreme heat waves and the, record-breaking droughts and the crazy wildfires and all of this. We have the incumbent administration that's like clownishly staffed with climate deniers and oil and gas executives, and is doing shit like, putting out Coley, the anthropomorphized coal mascot for Trump's energy policy. Like there's a lot of fertile grounds here to like strike a strong contrast with around climate. And again, that makes it weirder for me to that in this moment of all moments, when everyone else is pulling back from climate, to have folks on the left who care about ultimately addressing the climate crisis for our kids who are going to be growing up in this dystopia if we don't, to be like adding into that discourse.
Yeah, to that point, Aaron, you circulated a clip that really foregrounds the extent to which AI data centers in particular have been the sort of hook for people to connect climate issues to the economic and environmental issues in their own lives. Can we play that clip?
You're willing at this point to forego basically every conservative issue and let the Senate fall into the hands of Democrats if that's what it takes to kill data centers.
Yep. My entire community is going to break rank.
So that was a Hood County, Texas conservative voter saying that the AI data centers are such a significant issue for her that she and her entire community, ostensibly, are willing to vote for Democrats after being historically Republican. When you see something like that, Matt, does that give you any pause about the argument to decenter climate as a political valence?
I'm not sure that person is so fired up about the data centers for any sort of climate reason, although there's certainly climate reasons you can be fired up about them.
But isn't that your argument? That you don't have to say climate out loud, but we know that these are climate reasons, and this is exactly the reason why Democrats should align themselves on the climate side of innumerable things, including AI, which, to your point, this Eric Adams clip, many Democrats are very much rallying the troops in the other direction.
This is where I believe some of the affluent voices on the far left are getting it wrong again. They have the luxury to reject AI because their children already have access to elite schools, technology, tutors, and opportunities. But working class families, communities of color, and economically challenged neighborhoods do not have the privilege of standing still while the rest of the world moves forward. And if we truly care about economic justice, then AI education must become a civil rights issue of our time. Our children don't only have to play video games, they can invent them, they can create them. They don't have to only buy robots, they can create them, they can invent them. This is an artificial fight to stop artificial intelligence. My communities need it.
Well, and I can just say, like, I agree with Matt. I'm not sure that clip is. I think that person is just talking about the fight against these data centers. But for me, again, the thing that I've been trying to wrap my head around, because I see it among, and I don't know exactly where you're at, Matt. I might have made assumptions, but I've seen it among a lot of the climate hushers, that at the same time as they're saying that Democrats, in order to win, need to stop talking about this majoritarian, if not super majoritarian set of issues, they are also, at the very least, not pushing Democrats to come out strong on AI and data center issues, or they're arguing Democrats should come out on the other side, the opposite side of all these communities across the country, right? Regular people across partisan divide, across ideological divide, coming together to oppose and stand up to big tech billionaires and the oligarchy in the sort of physical way that it is intersecting with their communities. Again, not assuming where you are, but it is hard for me for the people out there who are both saying we got to stop talking about climate, it's a huge problem, and you look at the numbers for climate, and then they're also not saying, Democrats, why the fuck are you not jumping all in on what is probably the greatest golden political opportunity in a generation, which is this revolt of regular people across the country?
Yeah, I mean, I will admit that there's obviously mass popular anger and resistance to AI and data centers. That is very clear. I still, and I didn't even know if we'd open this can of worms, but I don't think sort of blocking data centers is a very good approach for climate politics. I also think broadly for the left, I think, is addicted to a form of politics that only makes clear what we're against and oppose, and is not
Matt,
so. Can I
this from the guy that just told us not to advocate for climate policy? You want us to be for something, but you don't want us to say what we're for in case it's unpopular, or persuade anybody that they should also be for it. But you're going to criticize us for only being what we're talking about, what we're against?
I mean, this is just something I've seen in climate politics for a generation. Is we're against fossil fuels, we're blocking pipelines, we're blocking. But what excited me about the Green New Deal was that it was finally a positive vision about what we're going to build, and we're going to build a new world. We're going to build new infrastructure, and to be honest, that by putting all our chips in this kind of blocking form of politics, I think that is going to inhibit that more positive type of building politics. And again, if we're going to decarbonize, it's going to take a whole lot of workers who build things like public
Like a
transit
Green New
systems.
Deal.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're for the Green New Deal, but you don't think we should talk about the Green New Deal, and also you're opposed to a block on AI data centers because
I'm just the kind of Marxist who doesn't think that actually thinks that technological development can be good, and there are two sides to it. That can be, on the one side, it can be under capitalism, it can be really negative and exploitative, but it has this kind of liberatory potential that if we could harness.
Well, are we under capitalism at present?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is worth really underlining the current context of the AI build out, which is you have less than a dozen big tech companies and billionaires, truly the oligarchy, who are trying to put entire careers and sectors out of work. That is the ultimate goal of this, right? In fact, that is the only way that this is not, this enormous bubble that when it pops, it takes down half our economy as collateral damage, because the only way these economics work out is if they're so phenomenally successful at this goal, the value that the system as it's currently constructed provides is by destroying jobs and careers. And so that, that's the context that we're talking about. I do think that's, a lot of the opposition to data centers is like all of the just physical community. This is going to be awful and decrease my quality of life. But I do think there's an aspect of it that it's like a revolt against this oligarchical, non-democratic transformation of our economy to benefit a few billionaires. And that you Matt, you talk so much about like we need to build a working class politics and how central that is. Like this is, I don't see any issue that has more potential to like build a cross partisan working class politics that is oppositional to the interests of oligarchy and billionaires than this one that we're seeing right now.
There's first of all, I'm just more in line with like the Bernie Sanders proposal to take public stake of the AI companies, take public ownership, and then we can actually shape it, right? Because
he also put forward he also introduced a national moratorium.
Absolutely, and I actually, I agree with the second policy more because I think we have to understand that this technology is happening. We need to design policies to have control over it, and that's what his policy was enacting. But let me just get back to the working class part, which is that there are a lot of unions and building trades workers who are not opposing these data centers. In fact, there's an organization that is like my North Star, guiding star for climate politics, which is called the Climate Jobs Organization. They have a chapter in Illinois, and they just came out very angry because Pritzker just signed a moratorium on data centers where these unions had negotiated good project labor agreements and very good union jobs with these data centers. And now the Climate Jobs Organization, I think, rightly points out that these data centers are going to go to Indiana or Ohio. They're going to go elsewhere, and these unions are going to be not benefiting from it. And I think the unions can leverage these types of things for the benefit of the unions. And by the way, also, there is a scenario in which the build out of data centers creates so much demand for clean energy that we can actually harness that and force them to also pay for the build out of clean energy. And there's already, that's actually happening in Minnesota, where Google is now financing huge expansions of solar and wind, but also these kind of new cutting edge technologies in long duration storage. I think they're called form batteries, that they're putting millions of dollars into developing these technologies. We have been in a scenario where the electricity demand in this country has been basically flat for a generation. And if we can actually harness and tax these hyperscalers to force them to actually make sure the build out of demand is clean, that could actually be a climate win.
Sorry,
right?
I gotta get in here. A few things. First of all, the substitution argument, which everyone says, that is fundamentally an argument that corporations can and have made against literally any pro-social government action ever. You're a scholar of Marx, right? Like Marx talked about this with regard to child labor, right? He was like, companies are talking about if we don't do child labor here, it's just going to happen over there. I don't think that's an argument for we should legalize child labor then.
Also, Bernie's moratorium would be federal, right? It's everybody. You can't shift it around, at least within the country from state to state, if there's a moratorium on all the states.
It's also just on because I've seen a lot of folks, obviously Searchlight Institute has been pushing this, that like this could be the climate answer. And that feels so divorced from the reality of, first of all, that's not what's happening, right? Overall, by and large, companies are like creating new natural gas plants behind the meter. Correct. In order to do this. Which are like unbelievably dirty, to say nothing of their diesel generators that all of these need to run. But it is also true that like even if we're to require them to use clean energy, them covering their mess doesn't decarbonize anything. It just siphons renewables away from actual decarbonization. It uses that land because there are some finite, issues with siting solar or whatever. It uses that for new generation instead of actually decarbonizing the things we need to decarbonize, right? I also just think like the principle of we're going to break the grid by carpet bombing it with like sudden huge concentrated loads, and then we'll offer to like fix a tiny fraction of what's broken and have everyone like look at us as the savior. This is, we improve the grid by improving the grid. Like it seems very silly for us to say that we can just rely on the goodness of the hearts of these AI oligarchs to like do this work for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it wouldn't be that. I think it would be taxing them and taking their wealth to help raise funds for all the investment that is needed to decarbonize the grid. Which you said it earlier, like clean energy is the cheapest form of energy. It's become this talking point, which I think is again a not very honest or credible type of slogan, because to actually make a clean energy grid, we actually need a huge amount of investment in transmission lines and backup generation, and also this kind of long duration storage, like I mentioned, that Google is financing. And those technologies do not yet exist. Long duration storage that can, where I live, where it's cloudy and we have winter, the grid won't work with just solar and wind where I live. You need nuclear, which is also not a lot of capitalists are really excited about investing in that. And long duration storage is something that we need like innovation in. So if we can harness this huge build out of energy demand to push that kind of innovation and then take public control over it, like Bernie's saying, that's kind of, I think, something that we should think about. And also, again, the very workers that we need to build a Green New Deal or to build public transit, public housing, transmission lines, new electricity, there are all these kinds of building trades workers that are represented by that climate jobs organization. And if we are the climate movement has antagonized those unions and workers for years and years and years and years.
I'm sorry, this is crazy. Overwhelmingly, across the country, everyone, including working class people, are against this. I don't know what this discrete climate jobs group is that you keep alluding to, but there's a weird, like, sleight of hand that's happening where the overwhelming public opposition to these things being built for myriad reasons, because they are polluters, because they are messing up people's water tables, because they are surveillance infrastructure that's ultimately going to lead to a kind of minority report future, are being opposed. So I don't understand how we keep coming back to this idea that it is somehow antagonizing the working class to do the thing that the working class want us to do, which is to stop these data centers from being constructed.
You're absolutely right. There is a mass, I would even say, working class, popular resistance to this technology. What I am saying is for climate, we do need to get these specific kinds of workers on board for our agenda. And that's the types of workers who are going to build the new energy system we need to build all the new infrastructure.
On board for what agenda? Because the agenda that you seem to be pushing right now is building data centers that nobody wants and making the argument that it's necessary to build out a clean energy grid, when I would question the premise that the issue behind us not having made the energy grid green or worked on that infrastructure project is a financing issue. I don't think it's a financing issue why we haven't pursued green energy.
And I just, again, and I think this, again, I'm going to own up to having been too heated in some of our Twitter exchanges. And I don't like that about myself when that happens. But I just for like transparency and explanation, and this is why I reached out. I wanted to like talk, because it's harder to like, impugn someone's like intentions when you actually are in front of them versus they're just like an avatar on a social media site. But like, I fundamentally cannot wrap my head around how a smart person can in good faith simultaneously make the argument that in order to build a working class politics, Democrats need to abandon climate, stop talking about climate, stop prioritizing climate, a widely popular set of issues, And by the way, one other thing in the latest Yale numbers, it found 49% of voters said that global warming should be a high or very high priority for the president or Congress. So that's not, that's not a super majoritarian, but a number that a lot of the climate hushers have said, well, people might care about this, but they don't really care about it. 49% say it should be not just we support it, high priority. That simultaneously, we're going to say that, and we're going to say that this issue that is legitimately unpopular and is legitimately something that has the potential to mobilize, as you said, masses of working class people around a anti-billionaire working class politics, that I'm not going to be telling the Democratic Party, you got to go all in on that. I don't understand how we can in good faith have those two ideas in our head at the same time.
No, I definitely think that there is some juice in this kind of AI populism and opposing AI. It's clear to me in 2026 and 28 that is going to be a mass popular position to take. And that's why, by the way, I think Pritzker did that, right? He has sites. And so I will not deny that. I just have this other more narrow view that in climate politics that we have put all our focus continually on only blocking the bad stuff. And I felt that finally in the Green New Deal cycle, we actually had started to be revolving around a politics of building a new world and new infrastructure. And that's where I think we have an opportunity to not only win over the unions who are going to do that building, but if you actually did do something like a Green New Deal that actually delivered the infrastructure, like fast free buses or whatever, that improve people's lives, you could start to build back this sort of broader working class coalition. But I will not deny that in the short term, doing this kind of anti-AI populism will create dividends for politicians that do it. It's very clear.
So help me understand then, if you continue to be supportive of the Green New Deal, what argument exactly that you're making in this New York Times article, which seems to be about staying away from anything that looks like the Green New Deal? Now, I want to be clear, if the argument is simply frame policies, as you should do in every issue area, in a way that they appeal to the immediate, oftentimes economic/material concerns of voters, I'm behind you. That's true of Medicare for all too. I'm not sitting here making the case for Medicare for all as a sort of abstraction that wouldn't it be nice if we all had healthcare. It's no, the average American family spends $20,000 a year on healthcare. Let's stop that. Okay? So this is not unique to energy policy. And to the extent, I would argue, to the extent that there's been a crunchy green wolves in the mountains version of environmental politics that has been dominant over the last 50 years, it's precisely because the only people who were sincerely interested in climate are crunchy Birkenstock ladies who want to save the wolves, because our political system has been largely disinterested. But to hold the political system accountable for that kind of framing when they've never even gotten into the fight, including with Biden, who had this really milquetoast foray into climate, despite what all of everybody who wanted to lie on his behalf said, it was milquetoast and minimal. What then do you advocate for, if not a full-throated embrace of climate policy? I mean, I'm confused about what the future of climate advocacy in the Democratic Party looks like, given that you've written this article titled "Democrats Don't Have to Campaign on Climate Change Anymore."
Yeah, again, I'm a huge fan of the Green New Deal. I thought it was a big shift in climate politics towards this more positive, inspiring vision. I do think it got poisoned for a number of unfortunate reasons. And so now
Right.
I
And
believe, I already explained the AOC, and I think a lot of the green NGOs got a hold of the policy, and within months, the AFL-CIO came out against it.
So you really think the failure of the Green New Deal is because of AOC and not because the Democratic Party never pushed for it at all? Even if you think that AOC's circular was bad and easily exploited, do you put no responsibility on like the party for not being willing to develop something in tandem with the resources at their disposal, as opposed to her one brand new little congressional office putting out these materials? I mean, it feels like blaming the least, the least powerful person in the mix who's doing their best for a party's complete disinterest in defending or explaining or advocating for a policy prescription.
I mean, the Sunrise Movement took credit for the Inflation Reduction Act. They said that this is one guy who wrote in The Nation that their advocacy led to the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think that's true, actually.
Wait, but
so I don't
now we're
think
switching between a couple things. We just hopped from AOC's Green New Deal, which we were blaming for climate. I don't know exactly what you're blaming it for either, because is the claim that it caused somebody to lose a race?
If I can just finish the point I was trying to make, which is that now I think it makes more sense that people should be arguing for a broad anti-austerity public goods agenda that climate would fit into, but it's not. The Green New Deal made climate the center of this whole program, this whole attempt to realign politics. Like it was the people all the way back to Obama. People thought this was going to be the issue that realigns politics back to the Democratic Party. I'm just saying we should decenter climate. We should make it about improving working class lives, and which includes a whole lot of things that aren't really climate related, which I would include healthcare, childcare, and all sorts of public goods and public infrastructure that we need to invest in. And we just need to make it about working class, end of month material needs. And if we can build that power, yes, we want to enact something like a Green New Deal. We want to decarbonize the economy, but I just don't think climate. I think we've ran through a cycle where people thought climate was going to be at the center of that, and I think is not a good.
Can I say the idea, like, obviously Build Back Better was supposed to be much bigger than climate, and it was, I think, Joe Manchin essentially who slimmed it down to climate. So the idea there was not for climate to be the only thing. I think it is worth. I agree with you that, like, the Inflation Reduction Act, it happened because of the climate advocacy that led up to it, right? Like, it happened after the culmination of this time when there was climate moralizing, right? You had Greta Thunberg, you had Sunrise. Obviously, they were making an economic argument, but they were also doing a climate argument, and it's just worth underlining that was required in order to get a major piece of climate legislation. And so again, if we care about climate and understand the timelines, that we need rapid decarbonization, we need to be doing whatever we can as quickly as we can. If we care about that, then we need to understand that, like, we need to build power around climate. It's the only way that, like, that has ever happened in our history.
And also, I'm sorry, Matt, I want to come back to the point that I was making, which is that you seem to, you are hopping around from point to point a little bit, because I don't think you really have an argument about how the Green New Deal actually hurt any Democrats' actual chances. To the extent, to Aaron's point, some Democrat in the upper Midwest, the Montana, North Dakota, or wherever, where oil interests are so powerful, wants to not put the words Green New Deal or whatever on their website. That's a perfectly fine argument. I think I opened up by saying, if your article is simply saying we need to frame climate issues in a way that are appealing to the voters in a given locale, then that's obvious. That's just politics. That's fine. People can center whatever they think is going to make it work. But that is not the framing of this article. You repeatedly, for example, you come back to this idea that the people who are pushing for this kind of policy are the, quote, Brahmin left. You say the voters who already prioritize climate action are firmly in the Democratic camp and highly educated and affluent, or as the economist Thomas Piketty calls them, the Brahmin left, which candidates like Mr. Forstag, Mr. Reichard, and Mr. Berg seem to understand is that for blue-collar workers, energy is an end-of-the-month issue and affordability should be the overarching policy goal. Okay, like, this feels like a hit job. This is why I accused you of being a Hillary Clinton style of breaking up the banks, cure racism candidate, because it feels consistently like in this conversation, we've all agreed that there is a working class, low income, populist uprising across the country against data centers. Yet this weird point keeps getting made that somehow we need, that somehow it's only elites, that this is an elite concern, that the Green New Deal was somehow harmful to this working class effort. The Green New Deal might not be beneficial to somebody somewhere in the world. That's fine. Or in the country, that's fine. But to actively make the case that people should not talk about climate seems to suggest that there's something harmful in doing so.
And I think,
where's the evidence of that?
I think you're right that the Green New Deal was pretty effectively, like in a lot of places, it was effectively polarized. I think like that to me is not an argument for we shouldn't talk about climate. It's like, okay,
what's the argument? Who
it's
is
like
the Green New Deal?
We need to figure out
who's the candidate? Can you give me some context for the candidates who ran on the Green New Deal and didn't win because they ran on the Green New Deal? Because we're talking right now about AOC, who's not only one of the most popular members of Congress, is topping lists for who's going to run in 2028, and who also is the number one fundraiser in Congress.
I think that's a good point. Let me say, even if I give you that, which good point, Brianna, I can't actually name that, but like, then figure out other ways to talk about climate, right? Climate and Community Institute has been doing great work to think about how can we talk about climate in populist ways. Like, I think it is totally valid to say we need to be having real, hard conversations about what are the best ways to talk about climate. And that feels like a very different thing than to say Democrats need to stop talking about climate in order to win, as echoing all of these corporate interests that have been pushing that message.
Yeah. What do you say to that, Matt?
I just, again, I think there's value to being laser focused and minimalist in your politics. And I do think that we're not gonna win over a lot of the working class that has left politics with a climate focus. I just don't. And I do think a lot of the people that already vote for the Democratic Party are very passionate about climate change. There's so many different issues that we could campaign on, and I think there is something to be said about just being minimal and focused on the.
So what about AI as an issue? You both seem to agree, which I don't understand, that AI is not a climate issue.
No. It definitely is a climate issue, 100%. I mean, we're talking about like vastly increasing energy usage. We're talking about.
I said that earlier, and you seem to co-sign Matt's framing of that after we played that clip. That is not a climate. It's not about climate.
No, I think to that voter in Texas, I don't have any knowledge that.
Well, I don't know anything about what that voter in that isolated clip. What's motivating her to object to it being built in her neighborhood? I'm not gonna say it is climate. I'm not gonna say it isn't climate, though, preemptively. What I am gonna say is that AI is a climate issue, and AI is clearly an issue that's galvanizing a lot of people around the country. So my point is that when Matt says, I don't think people are motivated by climate, I'm like, well, you're doing the thing that you're telling folks not to do in your Times article, which is to frame things as like green or climate on their face. But that doesn't mean that, in fact, people aren't very much motivated by climate issues if you explain it to them in a different way, outside of the Al Green style abstraction of, CO2 emissions are going up and there's greenhouse warming, right? So I think that it's a very dangerous game to play when one of the best lanes to drive people through is going to be, I support a moratorium on data centers. Or how about this? I oppose a war in Iran, and I oppose sending money to Israel, which, by the way, war is the number one climate polluter in the world. One of the top sources of pollution. Now, that's a fact that might not have a lot of traction right now in this moment if I got on TV and said it, because frankly, no one in the Democratic Party or elsewhere has ever really made that case to the public. I know that because I'm a lefty nerd who has Kate Aronoff on and talks to her about these things, right? But imagine a world where the Democratic Party wasn't just running abstractly on climate, but was saying we have to stop all of these new wars, in part because it's killing our planet and Palestinians and Iranians and everybody else.
You notice how you discuss that in terms of we need to explain to people these linkages between climate and their cost of living. We need to make the case, and you might be right. I mean, like, again, there is a moral imperative to kind of try to say that we do need to take the extra effort to explain how people's material lives are linked to this existential crisis of climate change. And I guess maybe I'm becoming more like practical about politics that if our starting point is we need to like connect several dots and explain and do linkages, that it's not going to be so as effective as just being focused on what is people's everyday end of month struggles. And again, a lot of it is linked to climate, transportation, electricity costs, housing costs. These things are all connected to climate. My point is just like, why not focus on those direct things? And you could say you should link it to climate, but why if we can build working class power and if we can rebuild political power, which again we lack horribly right now, then we can address climate with power. But if we don't have the power, there's nothing that's going to happen on climate change. And I've become more convinced that making those linkages, focusing on it, is not necessarily going to be effective as just, again, Mamdani style, laser focus on what people are focused on in their
and the answer
lives.
Again, the answer to why is because that is a pretty necessary part of getting the kinds of climate solutions at the scope and speed and rate that we need. Like there's going to be some decarbonization. Well, with AI, maybe not. Putting that aside, there's going to be some decarbonization just because like the economics are so good and like solar is expanding because it is, so cheap. That's happening around the world. But like just it's not enough. We already talked about the time that the US passed climate action. It was because people were talking about climate as climate. And I don't think the leakages here, again, are that hard. 67% of voters think global warming is affecting the cost of living in the US. 64% think it's affecting their own cost of living. There's a lot of other data in here showing that people, by and large, understand it. It's like not a huge stretch, and there is real intrinsic value to that work of trying to build this mandate, trying to build support for the kind of shit we need to do if we're not going to live in an apocalypse Mad Max future.
I think the most important thing to affect climate is to actually be able to build power for a Bernie-like public investment type politics, right? The thing about Biden was, he didn't care about public investment. He wanted to do this Inflation Reduction Act that incentivized the private sector to do all the work for us, right? I think we need the left in power, in broad majoritarian power, and that is the way to act on climate. And I think to build that power, we have to. I just think we should really try to meet the working class where they are at the end of the month, address their needs directly, and then build that power, and then do this kind of big public investment program that will address climate, but doesn't have to be climate Green New Deal centric. It can be about addressing working people's needs on a broad scale.
And I would say, I think and again, this getting back to our Twitter exchanges, but I think you rightly pointed out, I think 2016 Bernie as like a good example of this. 2016, I mean, you initially said 2016 Bernie, he didn't, he did this minimalist thing. He didn't talk about climate. That's not true. Climate was a big part of that campaign. He said it on the stage. I
don't think it was a big part.
He was asked,
everyone does this 2016 Bernie revisionism.
He was asked, what's the biggest...
He never talked about race. He pretended like that we were a monoculture. He didn't talk about climate. None of that is true.
He was asked, what's the greatest security challenge of the country faces? He said climate change. That to me, I remember being in the room watching that.
It too.
And it was like this revelation because I'd never seen anyone speak like that. And it was like, oh my God, this is revolutionary.
They laughed about the room.
And then he doubled down on it.
Insane.
He did ads on climate, right?
Senator Sanders, greatest national.
The scientific community is telling us if we do not address the global crisis of climate change, transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to sustainable energy, the planet that we're going to be leaving our kids and our grandchildren may well not be habitable. That is a major crisis.
It wasn't the only thing he talked about. He talked about a lot of things around working class and public investment, as you said, and climate was like a significant piece of that. And I think that campaign would have been worse if he had said, I'm only going to talk about these things. I'm not going to talk about climate.
I
it certainly would have been worse to him, like if he had won and come in and being able to like do some real climate action with a mandate for it.
I think most people, when they think of Bernie 16, they think of Medicare for all, free college tuition, cancel the debt, and $15 minimum wage. I'm not saying he didn't talk about climate. I don't think climate was at the kind of core memorable message of his campaign.
Right, but we've established that if your argument is simply that it doesn't have to be or shouldn't be the tentpole issue, I don't think anybody here disagrees with that. I'm not going to go down to my neighbor in a low income housing development and say, hey, vote for me. I'm the solar energy candidate. I mean, maybe that I don't want to sell that person short. Maybe that is their priority. But I'm not daft. But I'm also not going to go around and act scared of my own shadow. I mean, I think what's frustrating about this, there's a version of this discussion that gets had all over the left, where Bernie's, frankly, courage in redefining the public interest around Medicare for all, which nobody else was talking about, really, that Obama had killed as a conversation 4 or 5 years previous, is interpreted, it's like retrofitted as, oh, Bernie ran on these popular things. No, Medicare for all was not polling as a supermajority issue before Bernie's 2016 run the way it is now. He made an argument for it and understood that there was an untapped desire for something, made a good definitive case for it, and that has been an enduring priority for the American public, even though he didn't even run in the last cycle and nobody else has really been carrying the mantle for it in the time since. And this is what is frustrating to me. There is this kind of, I'm sorry, like cowardice, this kind of pathetic cowardness, like weird loser energy on the left, where it's very clear that a lot of people only really liked Bernie because he was winning, and would not have had the courage of their convictions to support a candidate that shared their values if they didn't frankly benefit from the fact that, like Zoran was up against, Cuomo was up against a historically unpopular candidate, got some wind under his wings, and therefore seemed like he might possibly win. And then everyone said, oh, there's a permission structure to like this guy and to believe in what he's talking about. We have to, as a community, understand that we can make our own destiny the same way that the right tells people that they should be afraid of electric ovens, or that we're going to take away their hamburgers, or making trans girls in sports a primary issue for conservative voters. There is no hook for anybody caring about that. There are like 10 girls in high school in America right now who are trans and trying to play on a sports team. And if they can do that with nothing, Democrats say that their success in that realm is because no one likes left politics. No, it's because no one is even arguing for anything in the alternative. We fight defensively on their terrain and then wonder why it takes up so much energy. The reason why I'm pushing back so hard, Matt, about this Green New Deal framing is because if there were some world where someone was running loudly on a Green New Deal and lost, I could see the argument that that's not a good strategy. But what we have is a world where no one's ever sincerely run on a Green New Deal. And the one person who has made it a significant part of their identity is one of the most popular politicians in America. I don't care for her, by the way, but this is true.
This is the most positive I've ever seen you on AOC. It's.
I mean, well, at least nice. Since 5 or 6 years ago. But it's not being positive. I'm just calling balls and strikes here.
Yeah, I'm passionate about climate action. I would love to live in a world where climate could be the Medicare for all for Bernie 16. It could be an issue where an inspiring politician could explain and change the conversation in a way that brought together a mass politics around that issue. But I don't think climate is like healthcare. As you said earlier, what did you say? Average American spends $20,000 a year for healthcare. Healthcare is a very just horrific every day, every month struggle for people in this country. And I think that is a clear issue you can build this kind of mass politics around. I've become less convinced that climate can be that issue because it requires
And what about AI?
AI, I think in the short term it can. I think there's something happening. It is this kind of existential thing that I think it can be a big populist
So don't call
issue.
it climate, call it AI. What about energy costs?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you read the part of we should be talking
don't
about
call
energy.
it climate. Don't call it energy costs. What about water resources?
Well, that I think is an overstated issue with AI, but that's another discussion or debate we can have.
Okay. Do you think Republican? By the way, I am not. Again, I'm not the expert, so I'm not going to weigh in on whether that's an overstated issue. But the idea that there was a Republican somewhere that said, oh gosh, I guess maybe trans issues in sports are an overstated issue, or the idea that meat, they're going to take away our meat is like a complete. Haitians are eating our cats and dogs. There's litter boxes in girls' restrooms. We have a real phenomenon that people are already mad about, and we're going to say, oh, well, it's probably not quite as serious as people are making it out to be, so we probably shouldn't exploit public revulsion against this horrible surveillance empire that's being built by oligarchs around us and use that to our advantage?
I think we should, and I think the broader popular issues are, I think, about what Aaron was talking about, that it's gonna kill people's jobs. It's gonna be, and as you're saying, the surveillance, and I think people see the slop that it creates and react to that. I think that is a very potent mass popular issue. I don't
Making
think
their kids stupid. They can't read.
Yeah. No, but I think the water and the local kind of environmental impacts are less the basis for this broader popular anti-AI populism. And I think Bernie has actually made it more about these kinds of larger issues of the labor market and the problem with these billionaires running these algorithms that control our lives in all these horrific ways. But yeah, so I'll stop there.
I think I want to say one more thing about Zoran, which I think there's the specific substantive lesson from his campaign, but I think there's a broader lesson that gets to what Brianna was talking about, which is like building the playing field that we want to play on, right? Like at the beginning of that mayoral race, the playing field was everyone expected the playing field was going to be about public safety. And that's not going to be a race that the leftist was going to win. Right. And so instead of like just sort of accepting that as unmoving and that's the way it is, right, that campaign was like, no, we're going to create this shift. We're going to just rebuild the score to one that we feel more comfortable on. And I'm not saying that in every instance, like climate should be the thing that we turn to rebuild. But I think it does speak to this point that like we cannot be accepting political realities as like written in stone. We have a job, if we care about the future of organized human civilization on this planet, to try to build the world where this shit can work. I think like it's not a huge stretch, again, based on the fact that by and large people support this stuff and increasingly people understand the material effects that it has on their lives. But like that, I think that's work that we need to do. I think my kids' future is worth that work. And like, it's not going to happen if the answer is we just need to stop talking about climate and we're going to give a permission structure to the larger Democratic Party that already wants to do that anyway because it's easier.
Yeah, I mean, and I would again say it's not a forever prescription. I would love if we could build the kind of power in this kind of left focus on taxing the rich, redistributing wealth to invest in public goods and public infrastructure. If we could build that politics, it's very clear to me that climate could be in the long term at the center of it, or not even at the center of it, I would say, but just a part of it, right? And that would be great. But I think now the left needs to really focus on building that power by shifting back to the working class, which has been the bastion of socialist and left politics for much of the 20th century. And that if we don't do that, we're just not going to have the power. We're going to have the kind of compromised, razor-thin majority that Joe Biden faced that had to push through this very like scaled down, as you mentioned, like it could have been Build Back Better, it could have been a more robust kind of social investment program. It got all cut away by the fact that the Democratic Party now is basically like has this only can hope for a kind of razor thin majority that in our totally backward constitutional system means you can't actually accomplish anything big or ambitious or important.
Or you could get rid of the filibuster.
Yeah, and that would help you for sure. And again, the Inflation Reduction Act came out of this sort of budget
Budget
reconciliation.
reconciliation. So it's all
Yeah.
kind of bullshit
I
anyway.
think
I mean, I'm
I
sorry,
think we
like,
totally agree. We totally agree on that need to do that work. I think there are so many far bigger, more important obstacles to making to building this populist tentpole for the Democratic Party that can get to that level. Like big tech oligarchs, like big pharma influence over the party, like the military war blob and the party's refusal to even like take a stand
and not
against
having,
the most unpopular war this country's
yeah,
ever had. Like there's
yeah.
so much to talk about here. The idea
And
that
ranked
we're
choice
going to talk
voting.
about climate.
Sorry, Zoran's whole thing. I really don't mean this as Zoran shade, but if we want to replicate those results, we cannot ignore the role that public financing and ranked choice voting played in his ability to win. That is not a slight against Zoran, because he had to be very talented to take advantage of the opportunities that opened up for him. But like, he goes nowhere if he's not running against Cuomo and doesn't have ranked choice voting that prompts all of those co-endorsements. I really need the left to internalize this lesson, because everyone's just making all of these judgments about other candidates who are winning in other parts of the country who are fighting on very different terrain than Zoran. And it's not necessarily their fault. Sorry.
There's definitely no
think too much
Zoran
of this
without
today.
public financing. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, and the
Yeah,
ranked
yeah.
choice voting. When
Yeah,
I
yeah.
interviewed him in February of last year, no one was interested. No one was talking about him. He had no name recognition. That was like the fifth time he'd been on the show. It was like we knew him as a, activist for the taxi cab guys and assemblyman and all those things. But it was not. I interviewed him as sort of like, I interview all the lefty candidates, but no one thinks it's going to happen. Right. So this revisionist history again, where like he was just so talented. He'd been talented and articulate for the 6 months before that during his campaign. But the breakthrough happens when you realize that there is no real leader for who's going to take down Cuomo. He starts framing himself in his ads as a Stop Cuomo movement. So it's very easy to retweet because everyone just wants to stop Cuomo. He's the branding on all the Stop Cuomo stuff. Then you get the cross endorsement. So the only other leading sort of left option in Lander says, oh, I would say Zoran's my number one, which gives him an enormous amount of credibility in the public sphere. And suddenly everyone tries to take him down because he seems like the easiest one to pick off. And he gets all of these viral moments off of these head-to-heads during the debate and such, where he also distinguishes himself as the only pro-Palestine candidate in the mix, like aggressively pro-Palestine candidate in the mix. This is the perfect storm that leads to a Zoran victory. And again, it took his talent to get there. But if we want people to take lefty candidates seriously without all this vote no matter who spoiler nonsense that ended up, frankly, taking Bernie down on some level in 2020, then you need to have ranked choice voting so people can actually rank their preferred candidate first without being shamed out of it.
I think a big turning point for Mamdani was actually just after Trump was elected, and I think it was December 24.
Yeah, that ad.
He went. It was more just a video. He went around with a microphone asking people in working class communities,
Trump
often
voters.
of color, why did you vote for Trump? And over and over, they said, shit costs too much. I can't live. I can't afford the cost of living. And I think that video, it went viral. I think that video had a big impact on how he approached his campaign. So
I do too. And
focus.
he framed his campaign around the people wanted. But my point was about how he broke through as a candidate. I think that video went viral as a video, not as that guy's running for mayor, right? It went viral as this is an interesting explanation of what happened. And it's reframing our understanding of what happened in the last election. Less so, this is a guy running for mayor of New York and I understand who he is and I want to vote for him. Because after that, his name recognition was still single digit.
But I think it influenced his campaign, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
His campaign's laser focus on cost of living was out of that experience, I think.
And I think again, getting back to your point about like the need to build, working class power, we need the majoritarian tentpole for the Democratic Party to be a populist fight for regular people against the oligarchs, against the elite impunity that has so angered, rightfully so many people across the political divide. I think there's a shit ton of things that the Democratic Party leadership and and across the board are doing that are directly in contradiction with that, building that tent and doing that work. And I think that climate action fits quite well within that, because we're talking about corporate special interests that have fucked us over, that are trying to have impunity. And we're talking about taking those on and responding in ways that can, yes, improve people's material lives. I think it fits pretty well.
It could fit. I'm, there's a lot of polling that shows Americans aren't really as angry about the fossil fuel industry as they are about the oligarchy, right? And I think a very clear populist and popular policy that go back to Bernie 16 and beyond is just tax the rich, tax the billionaire class, go after the wealthy and the rich, and tax them to fund public goods for us. And again, I think you might be right. It might be just as convincing to say this is about the fossil fuel industry and we're gonna attack them. They're ruining the planet. But I actually think a broader, just tax the rich, fund public goods, fight austerity, like these more general populist left approaches are gonna be able to, again, build that majoritarian mass coalition.
Matt, let me ask you this. I don't disagree with that, but I then also wouldn't turn around and say, don't write an article framed as Democrats don't have to fight for climate change anymore. Just as I wouldn't write an article called Dems don't have to fight for racial justice anymore, or Dems don't have to fight for gender equality anymore. Do you feel like you would write any of those articles just because we don't believe the tentpole issue of the Democrats in 2028 should be the ERA or abortion rights or the Voting Rights Act?
Again, I'm most concerned with rebuilding power, and I think I've become less convinced that a rhetorical focus on climate will help in that. So I tried to highlight these working class candidates who really aren't centering climate, and then I was actually so excited to see Sam Forstag actually won his primary. There's others that I feature in the piece. So I might be wrong, and maybe it was, again, maybe I was a very bad person for aligning with these more negative forces who might be happy to never talk about climate. But again, my principal motivation is we need to build power in the working class. It's just a basic Marxist position. And I think that is going to happen through this more focused, minimal agenda that doesn't cover all. And, Brianna, the way in which focusing on identity politics is not so useful in building that broad working class coalition.
Right. But I also don't go out of my way to say, I don't care about your issue. I acknowledge that your issue is important.
I do care about it.
Explain to you. Okay, but this is the analogy that I raised is, do you think it would be appropriate to write an article, or would you sign your name to an article that called Democrats don't have to run on, Democrats don't have to care about what's the actual framing? I don't want to misrepresent. Democrats don't have to campaign on social justice issues anymore.
I mean, social justice is just such a more broader issue.
Democrats don't have to campaign on voting rights anymore. Democrats don't have to campaign on women's rights anymore.
Yeah, I don't. Again, I think you'd have to contextualize.
Or I'll take a non-identitarian issue that's also Democrats don't have to campaign. That's, I guess, technically sort of climate-y fracking. Democrats don't have to campaign on. I mean, people were making the case that foreign policy doesn't move the needle somehow. You could say Democrats don't have to campaign on foreign policy anymore. In this environment, I mean, I don't know that there's something that people are free to frame what earlier you said, like, Democrats keep talking about what they aren't for, and they're so negative, and they won't make the affirmative case, but it's odd that is exactly what your article has done. And it could have been an affirmative case for, here's how Democrats can talk about climate and win, right?
Yeah, but I think that's what people have been trying to argue for the last several years, and I've become the Green New Deal people.
So AOC. and
No,
Bernie
not
Sanders.
just AOC, a whole movement, the Sunrise Movement and all these people. And by the way, people have commented on the Sunrise Movement in the recent elections was celebrating, I forget the candidate, New Jersey maybe, and they don't mention climate. The Sunrise Movement.
You guys have got to stop acting like the Sunrise. God bless the Sunrise Movement. I'm not trying to knock them at all, but you guys have got to stop acting like there's some like
No, I don't.
meaningful force
I'm very critical
in
of the
American
Sunrise
politics.
Movement. I'm very critical.
Okay, so you're like, okay, so the entire Democratic and Republican political apparatus is aligned against environmental reform. And so this critique boils down to AOC, Bernie Sanders, a couple of other squad members in the Sunrise Movement advocated for the Green New Deal, and those 7 people don't have to do it anymore.
No, and that influenced the Biden administration. I would argue the Biden administration made climate central to his administration. You may disagree, but I think he did. In a very compromised and bad way, but he did.
Democrats don't have to campaign on the student debt crisis anymore.
Listen, all these laundry list of questions are mostly moral questions about, do we care about these issues? Student
debt isn't a bread and butter economic issue?
No, it absolutely is. And it was central to Bernie's 2016 campaign.
Are you going to make the case that it was also central to Biden's? Because many people have, and I give the same exasperated sigh as when you make the case that he was prioritizing climate as part of his agenda.
I also think Biden's just like, I think it's a pretty flawed, N of one example, because we are talking about someone, not the man himself, but also the entire administration built around that man, who fundamentally couldn't talk, who fundamentally couldn't communicate or sell a message. So like whether or not they did things on climate, he was not effectively, like, I don't think any of us are going to argue people should pass climate and then be bumbling idiots about how they talk about it. And
well, he was very clear about his support for Benjamin Netanyahu.
That's true.
So I'm not going to let him off the hook on that one. All right. I think
again, I think a bigger reason that he had the political end that he did than that he, that his administration did some stuff on climate.
I definitely agree about that one. Matt, I'm going to give you the floor for any last words and to give you the opportunity to let people know where they can find you and your work on the internet and beyond.
Well, I'm Matt Huber. I'm on, for better or worse, on X or Twitter under @MattHuber78. Most of my writing is collected on my website, which is at Syracuse University in the Maxwell School. It's not the Matt Huber who works on climate at Purdue University. And after I wrote this article, he was very, very clear that he is not me. and yeah, my main thing as a Marxist, I think we have to be serious about building working class power. The working class is moving to the right all over the world, and that should be the number one thing we are worried about. I'll stop there. Thank you for having me. I'm a fan of the show, and it's great to be able to speak to your audience.
I'm glad you were able to come and do this, Matt. I think it's been really rich and instructive. Aaron, you too. Any last words? Where can people find you and your work on the internet and beyond?
I am glad we had this conversation, Matt. We're going to have another one, which I'm anticipating some of the dynamics might be a little switched on the Valley Labor Report. I looked forward to that too. I think that it is absolutely essential that we are working to build demands for climate action that are in any way aligned with the actual physical needs of decarbonization if we're going to avoid really, 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 really awful things for all of us. And it's just, we cannot do that if we're not talking about climate. And I still have not seen any evidence that Democrats talking about climate to the marginal degree that they have has anything to do with the unpopular state of the party versus, the corporate takeover of the party over the last decades. And I think this is an important conversation. I'm really glad we could have it. I've got a Substack. Folks can check it out. I'm on social media. I've got this podcast with The Nation, Fighting Fascism podcast. And as always, Brianna, it's great to be in the top tier of participants in your lovely show.
Thanks to you for joining again as well, Aaron. And thanks to everybody for tuning into this episode of Bad Faith Podcast. You know, you can get an additional episode on Mondays at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast if these Thursday drops are not enough bad faith for you. As always, take care of yourselves and remember to keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.